to do continuous education, so that at age 27, he was still listed as a student living in and studying in Central City, Nebraska. Now, if you do the math, that was 1917. In 1914, the Guns of August, World War I, the Great War had begun. And in May of 1915, a British ship, a passenger liner, was sent to the bottom, the Lusitania, with the loss of many American lives. The temperature of the country went up briefly, but when Germany announced they were not going to engage in unrestricted submarine warfare anymore, the temperature cooled back down. America stood down from the war effort, and there they were for about another 18 months until the very early months of 1917. A couple of things happened simultaneously between January and March of that year. First, the rumors got out, and then it was announced the Germans would in fact resume unrestricted submarine warfare. But the other, and perhaps the most inflammatory, was the Zimmermann telegram. Now, I'm standing in the midst of a historical society, so show of hands, who knows about the Zimmermann telegram? Oh, good work. I'm impressed. All right, so for the rest of us, the United States had a very isolationist attitude. They did not want to be involved in the European conflict. However, in their brilliance, the German foreign ministry realized that if America came in on the side of the Allies in the war, they might have a very difficult go of it. So they made a unique offer in a coded telegram, which was intercepted by British intelligence, transcribed and sent to the U.S. Department of State. The German Foreign Ministry, via their ambassador in Mexico City, sent the following offer to Mexico. If you will join us in our war effort, if you will launch an attack across the U.S. southern border, and we prevail, which we expect to do, you will be allowed to repatriate Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas.
Not California?
No. California was not part of the deal. I'm not entirely sure why. So with that, war fever broke out, and on the 6th of April, 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany. Now, this presented a genuine conundrum for the Religious Society of Friends, the Quaker Church, because they are a pacifist community. They have a peace testimony. But they were aware of the suffering and the destruction on a previously unknown scale that was going on in Western Europe. They were also aware of the work that was being done by the English Friends on the continent and the efforts that they were providing to ameliorate human suffering. So they had this desire to help that was juxtaposed to their opposition to military service. It was complicated by the fact that in previous conflicts, what was done with pacifist, conscientious objectors in the United States was not well handled. It was not uniformly handled either by the church or by the government. During the Civil War and the Spanish-American War, different states and jurisdictions handled these matters in completely different ways. Even different meetings handled it in different ways. So the question became then, what is military service? This became an internal conversation. Is it merely reporting for duty if summoned? Is it donning a uniform? What about if you do go, but you perform only non-combatant services? It was out of this conversation and a real desire to help that one of the most prominent Quakers in America stood forward, Rufus Jones, a great apologist and devotional writer for the Quakers, stepped forward in an offer to be the president of the American Friends Service Committee. The American Friends Service Committee was founded in Philadelphia on 30 April 1917. This was 3 weeks after the war broke out. Now they're beginning to take action. What Jones said was, but one impossible course for those of us who held this faith was to refuse the call to fight and, at the same time, refuse all responsibility for the tragedy, to withdraw into some calm retreat, assume for ourselves a holier attainment than that possessed by other Christians, and secure an easy safety purchased by a superior piety. It was the unanimous sense of the nascent American Friends Service Committee that Friends could not accept exemption from military service and at the same time do nothing to express their positive faith and devotion to the great human crisis. In regard to the goals of the American Friends Service Committee, Jones wrote, originally, we hope to be an American ambulance company like the English, but the U.S. militarized the ambulance service, so the next option was to do relief work seconded to the American Red Cross. But there was a threat. What if we do take these volunteers, we leave the country, and we go overseas? To that, Jones admitted that there were no selective service or draft guarantees. These initial young men, eventually men and women who volunteered, they did so at great peril because, Jones said, about all we could guess was that a man of draft age would be allowed to leave the country if he signed a promise to return when he was called. So this was not an easy undertaking. The American Friends Service Committee, working with the Red Cross, initially had a cadre of about 90 men who volunteered. Eventually, over the next 3 years, they grew to an organization of over 500 men and women who were serving overseas, primarily in France and Belgium. The initial training was done at Haverford College, which was at the time a Quaker school, a few miles northeast of Philadelphia. It's up by Bryn Mawr and Villanova. It's up there on College Row. The report of their activities, and keep in mind that the gentleman that I'm going to describe to you was an integral part of this. The following general schedule of training had been adopted. 05:45, time of rising, followed by 10 minutes of physical exercise in front of Barclay Hall. Of course, you who are familiar know that Barclay is the same name as our Barclay Press here in Newberg. 6:30, breakfast, followed by washing of dishes and room work. 7:30 to 8:25, talk by the unit members of the council. I'm not sure what that means, but that's what they did. 8:30 to 9:25, talks by specialists on social service, sanitation, hygiene, conditions in France, etc. 9:30 to 11:30, study of French under several competent instructors. I'm glad of that. And noon, dinner. 2 to 5:30, squad work in carpentry, mason work, agriculture, road making, auto repairing, and other forms of technical skill. 6 o'clock supper, 7 o'clock devotional meeting, 7:30, a lecture every other night dealing with the world conditions with special reference as far as possible to France and the future work of the unit. When Harlan Jones left Nebraska to be a part of this effort, people were coming in from all over the country. There was another individual who showed up in Harlan's cadre, one John W. McGee, listing his address as Route 1, Box 87, Silverton, Oregon. These two young men met at Haverford College and almost immediately formed a friendship which lasted a lifetime. Descendants of John McGee are living here in Newberg to this day. The late Jerry McGee's widow, Connie, is over in Friendsview, and Harold McGee lives in Spalding Oaks. There's a lot of ties to this community. That was one of the inducements, which I'll get back to, that eventually led the builder of this home out here to our city, our fair city. It was Jones who wrote this book, A Service of Love in Wartime by Harlan Jones, and it became a touchstone for a lot of the research that was done. It's a little laborious in places, but it's a wealth of information about the period. This, by the way, is a Google online book for free. Harlan Jones, at the completion of his training at Haverford, was issued a passport. This particular page is the opening page of his passport. The two distinctive points are, number one, it was issued only for travel to the nation of France. And secondly, it was restricted in that he was only allowed to exercise the privilege of this passport for relief work. Passports of the day held a bit more information than ours do today. Specifically, in addition to a picture with an embossed seal, it also provides a lot of physical information. In Harlan's case, it says face thin and nose large. He was listed as a student. The rest of the passport endorsements are telling because it describes the amount of time that he was out of the country. The French consul in Philadelphia endorsed the passport on the 2nd of April, 1918. The 3rd U.S. Naval District, on behalf of the U.S. military, endorsed it on the 3rd of April, the following day. And the next annotation is debarking in Paris on 13 April. So after a 10-day passage, he arrived in France and was accepted by the American Expeditionary Force through the Office of the Assistant Provost Marshal in Paris on the 15th of April, 1918, thus beginning a year's worth of service with the American Friends Service Committee in France. Unfortunately, the service didn't get off to the best of starts because soon after arrival, both John McGee and Harlan Jones were struck down by the flu pandemic that swept the world in 1918. The good news is they survived the experience. There's a wonderful story that is totally anecdotal and has nothing to do with this house about John McGee taking apart his wristwatch and putting all the parts all over the bunk bed in his fever-induced haze and then couldn't figure out how to get it back together again. I guess those things happen. But these people that had arrived now to do this relief work were sent out in over 100 different teams. And the vast majority of them all went to northern France and Belgium because that was the German invasion round, that's where the vast majority of civilian casualties occurred, and that's where the vast amount of damage that was done to French homes. So they went to work repairing French homes, rolling up behind the Germans as they were shoved back across the Rhine. There'd be a repeat of that drama some 20 years later. But we do know that they were engaged in carpentry and framing and masonry work, and they learned a lot about European architecture while they were restoring these homes, because in most cases it wasn't new construction. They were going in to existing country provincial farm homes and putting them back together again. Now, not all of it was work. They did manage to get a holiday in the south of France, and upon their return to Paris, they did what we believe is one of the earliest selfies. They took a camera, a Kodak, they put it on the back of a couch in front of a mirror and snapped the picture. This was what's written on the back. Picture taken in France, went on leave, February or March 1919, in a large mirror with a Kodak held on the back of the couch. We then know that they departed Brest on the 24th of April, 1919. So almost exactly a year that they were in France, but what an influential year it was. Upon return to the U.S., Harlan went back to Central City, Nebraska. He returned to Nebraska Central College, which is also a Quaker school, and was then retained as the head of maintenance for Nebraska Central College, which some people disparagingly refer to as being the janitor, but in fact he also was doing a lot of the maintenance repair work. And a number of things happened in that early chapter after coming back from the war. First of all, he met a secretary who worked at the school, Gertrude, courted and married her. And shortly after they were married, they adopted a little baby girl, Marilyn. Now, Marilyn, as it turns out, fast forward some 70 years, is probably one of the most renowned and accomplished music teachers in the city of Newberg. We have been to other events where we've seen a show of hands of how many people have studied piano under Marilyn Jones Antrim. So Marilyn now lives in Friendsview, as does her husband, Harold Antrim, who is a retired Quaker pastor. In 1935, another signal event, Levi Pennington, who was the 5th president of Pacific College, went on a tour of Quaker schools all across the nation. One of his stops was in Nebraska Central. And while he was there, he became incredibly impressed with the work of one Harlan Jones, and by all description, these two men could not have been more different. Levi Pennington was an accomplished public speaker, he was a PhD, he was a learned scholar, he had great personal skills. Harlan was essentially self-taught. He was shy to the point of being reticent. The two men did not, on the surface, seem to have a lot in common, but something clicked. They formed, again, one of these immediate and close friendships. And as Levi Pennington got ready to leave Nebraska Central, he came back to Harlan and he said, time comes that you need to change locations, change jobs, find something new. I have a place for you at Pacific College. So by 1937, a whole bunch of events had come together. The Jones were part of a non-pastoral friends meeting, which meant it was a silent meeting of adults only. They had a fairly rambunctious 4 or 5-year-old daughter. Levi Pennington's invitation was dangling out there because Gertrude and Harlan had had an opportunity to take a vacation to Oregon, so they'd known what it was like, and waiting for them was the McGee family. These deep, deep, close friendships. So with all of those things combined, they decided to take Levi Pennington up on his offer, and they moved from Nebraska, came out to Newberg, and settled in with Harlan taking the job of maintenance director at Pacific College. For a very short period of time, which I'll explain in a moment, he then spent a couple of years in the community doing essentially odd jobs. He was picking up handyman jobs, building jobs, whatever he could find, which is odd because he had this wonderful job at Pacific College. But in 1940, Newberg built a new school, and they needed more than a janitor. They needed someone to do all of their maintenance work. In 1940, Harlan Jones was hired by Newberg Schools and held that position until 1956, when he retired at the age of 66. The measure of the man comes a lot from the people that knew him, but some of it was written by his wife in a biographical letter shortly after he died. One of the statements is, Harlan never seemed to be able to express himself by word of mouth like he could on paper. That is the obstacle that made us decide for him to continue with his mechanical work rather than in the ministry as some had urged. Gertrude continues, seldom ever did he turn down any sort of job, but would try to do it to the best of his ability. And when we lived in such a lack of modern conveniences, he always found some way to improve the situation. And any time I ever mentioned anything useful that I did not have, he always found a way to get it for me. That is, with our limited finances. It came to the point in their marriage where eventually Gertrude stopped asking for things because she knew that despite all the other limitations, Harlan would go to work and make it happen. She also references in this letter milk coolers and an ice box, and I'm going to get a bit more of that story in a few minutes. Marilyn, his daughter, also tells this wonderful story when he was working with the school district, that not only was he doing work at the schools, but he was also doing private building projects, and he needed to get building materials from one place to another, primarily lumber and sacks of concrete. He didn't want to spend the gas doing that, so he built, by his own design and his own hand, a heavy-duty bicycle. And there are contemporaneous reports of him pedaling across town with boards, planks, or sacks of concrete on his shoulder, going from one job to another. The man, by all reports, was tough as nails. He had 2 very, very substantial and serious falls during his working career. And I know one of the gentlemen back here, who I will reference later, knows this story well. One of them was falling off a ladder in the front of his house onto the sidewalk. He was so badly concussed that he was in a coma for 3 weeks. Upon regaining consciousness, it was believed he would probably never return to full functionality. Yet it took him 3 months to get back to work full time. In another story, as a member of Newberg Friends Church, after that church had been built in the 1890s, by the 1940s it was time to do something about the steeple, which was falling into rack and ruin. It needed to be recovered and some repairs done. No contractor was willing to bid on it because of the steepness of it. So as a member, Harlan said, that's all right, I'll do it. And he did. He finished the job. Took a little time off to recover from one of the falls that he took from the steeple in the midst of those repairs. Again, all of those characteristics, and then quiet, and then industrious, and then creative, and this incredible generosity. His wife says he has always been so meek and kind and helpful to anyone he knew in need. Anytime I ever asked him to give to a cause, he has always responded. At times when I did not have a chance to ask him, I knew he would do it. So, let's talk a little bit about the house. Harlan himself called it the Stone House, and like I said, it's been called the Jones House or the Rock House. Gertrude then writes this. Meanwhile, Harlan helped his brother Ben to put up a frame house for their family who had moved to Oregon from Nebraska. Harlan had already begun to build a stone house, as he had never been where there was so much material going to waste as he saw in Oregon, just for the hauling. As a college professor had built a stone house out on the hillside, he figured he could do it. It did stretch out into a longer period than we had anticipated, as we had hurriedly put up a garage and were living in it. So, the garage and the family. Harlan Jones, Gertrude, and their little girl, Marilyn, in front of the garage. Let's deconstruct Gertrude's narrative just a bit. First, Harlan, I would love to have met this man. He was enterprising. He figured out that he could go buy 3 residential lots in the midst of the Depression at a very good price on the north side of a dirt road on the north side of Pacific College, which of course is Fulton Street. Then, using some inspiration from his time in France, knowing how a small stone or brick house could be put together, he got further inspiration from a George Fox professor. Emmett Gully, actually it was his son and his grandson who did most of the work, but Emmett Gully was a professor at then Pacific College. Immediately upon Gully's promotion became George Fox College, had built a stone house out of quarried material on Bell Road, and you can see it today if you drive eastbound on Bell Road from College. It's sitting right up there on the hill. Built out of the same material as the Fulton House, with the same arched entryway. So he was impressed with this and thought, I could probably do that too. Now, Harlan had previously built a brick house in Denver, so he knew how to do masonry work, plus what he had learned in France. But he couldn't afford brick. It just flat was too expensive. And per the previous reference, he'd never seen so much material going to waste, so he decided that he would build his house out of free stone. And he would get the rocks from the quarry, which is where North Valley Friends Church and Veritas School is now located, by building a trailer with 4 wheels out of heavy-duty steel, and then dragging that behind the family automobile and repeatedly driving up and down College, loading up more stones and bringing them down to the building site. However, they built the garage first, which looked like a great idea at the time. I'm sure Gertrude grew to regret some aspect of that. But if you go into the garage this very day, you can still see the outline of their living quarters. They had a bedroom area, a living room seating area, a little tiny kitchen. The kitchen window is still there on the east side of the garage. And behind that is the plumbing for the commode. To this day, there's a half bath in that garage at the exact same location, using the same plumbing. Now, as was so common for the era, they did not have a shower or a bathtub. Bathing instead was done in a large galvanized tub, usually on a Saturday night, out in the living quarters. That garage also had its own separate address in the 1940 census. That was 1015 Fulton. The house next door is 1011, and the house that he built is 1101. Those were the 3 lots eventually combined into 2 tax units much later on. But there was an interruption. The brother's house. Reference that generosity above. Gertrude continues, his brother Ben needed a job after the Depression, and it was arranged that he have the maintenance job at Pacific College, and Harlan found other work for a while until the new high school needed such a man to do their maintenance work, which Harlan took. in 1940. The simple fact of the matter was, he had a younger brother who was struggling. Their family couldn't keep it together. He knew he could by his own wits. He got hold of Brother Ben and said, come to Newberg. You can have my job. You can take the one at Pacific College. We'll figure this out. And when he got there, Harlan stopped work on his house and started to work on Ben's house, which was built right next door. Here's the house under construction. That's Marilyn standing in front of the west wall, right about where the kitchen is, and that's the garage roof over the top. And this is the construction of the front entrance with its arched entryway. I'm going to point out this little window right here next to the door. We'll tell you more about that in a moment. The materials were all done out of stone, and then the interior in lath and plaster. And the floors are quarter sawn local hardwood. The materials are absolutely gorgeous, and most of them are still original in the house. The architectural influences, as you can see and we described, came from a combination of what he experienced in France and what he saw at the Gully House. By 1942, the house was nearly completed. This is much as it looks today. The only thing that was left was the upper siding before they were able to move in. And here's the family again, 5 years after move-in in 1947. The little girl seems to be growing up. But this picture, in 1948, as Marilyn is getting ready now to graduate high school, the house pictured just over here, that's the frame house that was built for Brother Ben. It happens to be the same house. It's the same layout, it's the same floor plan, it's the same number of square feet, it's the same house, except it's made out of wood and not out of stone, because Ben and family needed a place to live, so they had to do it much more expeditiously. Now the question is, if you drive by that location today, that's a parking lot. There is no house on that site. What happened to it? It got moved. And the nice thing about it is that we've still got daylight this evening. When we're done, if you want, just walk out here on the southeast corner of School and Sheridan, and there sits Ben's house. That's the location to which they moved it. And if you look carefully, you'll see the architectural identity between the two houses. This was the house as it was when we got it, the summer of 2013. And that's the house as it looks today. Let's talk a little bit about some of the unique features of this home. And I'll start with this one, the front entrance. There's a wonderful story. During construction, with their affiliation with Newberg Friends and having all these other friends in the community, and knowing that they were building a house out of stone, the idea sprung up that we should throw them a stone shower, just like a baby shower, except what we're going to do is we're going to have friends and family bring stones that are meaningful to them. We're going to assemble it on the building site, and then Harlan took all of these special stones and built them into this part of the front facade. Now, there was a record of every one of those stones, where it was located, who it came from, and why it was meaningful. But unfortunately, like the burning of the library at Alexandria, that is lost to us. And we have no record except for the fact that at one time, this was very special to any number of people. As you walk in the front entrance, if you look off to your left, there is this little mysterious alcove, which collects dust. It has a window. It's a great place for Amazon to leave packages. We don't have a really good idea of what it, well, actually we do, but I'm going to hold off on that part of the story for just a moment. And as long as we're looking at odd things, take a look at this. We've got this entire stone house at the lower level. The upper level, there's siding, and then there's this odd little patch just to the left of the steeped roof at the front, which is also done in siding. Harlan was brilliant. He didn't make mistakes. What is the deal with this odd little piece of siding? Well, let's go inside. So now we enter the front room, which my wife and I call the parlor, which we use primarily for entertaining. It's got a number of unique characteristics, not the least of which is the fact the hardwood flooring and lath and plaster walls are all original, and they are truly beautiful. There are some heat exchangers that are mounted up high in the wall, which was, at one time there was an electric fan that were in the heat vents that would take heat from that front room and move it into the stairwell and then send heat up the stairwell, a very innovative way of conserving energy to heat the house in winter. And in a moment I'm going to show you this, which is the buffet in the parlor. And down here in the corner, the reason that door is open is to show you down that corner the safe that the owner built and installed in there as just an added accessory and accoutrement to the house. Now, look at the buffet for a moment. And then, if you will, go back to the mystery alcove. And then this odd bit of siding. There's a story. Here's the story. Harlan and Gertrude Jones were a married couple. Those of you who have experience with this institution know that a long-term successful marriage reaches a point where you are in complete accord with one another on each and every decision that can possibly be made. Yeah, I'm 48 years down the road. I'm working on it. When Harlan built the house, again, the man was in many ways a design genius. His desire was to go into this front room, providing heat pretty much for the entire downstairs, and build a Rumford fireplace. Very innovative design, flat front, radiates heat into the room, and in this wonderful little alcove here, he had room provided for the chimney structure, the flue. We had a place for the chimney to come out of the house just above the entryway. We even had a place in the alcove for firewood storage. This was a remarkably innovative design. Somebody had a slightly different idea. Gertrude knew that once they moved out of the garage and being well established in the community, they would be wanting to have dinners, they would be having barbecues, they would be having Bible studies, they would be having any number of things that would happen in that house, and they would need a place to store china and linens and serving utensils, and then a surface from which to serve food to the guests who arrived. So we had a conversation. Are we going to have a fireplace, or are we going to have a buffet? Well, here we are, some 77 years down the road, and I will tell you that in the front room there is no fireplace. There has never been a fireplace. But there is this lovely buffet that is still as functional as the day it was built. When we leave the parlor behind, we go into the kitchen. And the kitchen, this is kind of like George Washington's axe. It's the same axe George used to cut down the cherry tree, except since then it's had one new head and 6 new handles. The kitchen's always been here, but it's been through more iterations, I'm sure, than anybody can count. Beyond that, as you go out the door pictured there into the addition, which I'll address in a moment, there was a porch, beautiful enclosed stone porch. And one of the things that, when Richard mentioned that I stopped asking for things, one of the things that she thought would be a great idea would be a place for cold storage. Harlan wasn't going to just give her a root cellar. He built her a deep freeze by his own invention and design with a cable top. It was the first deep freezer in the city of Newberg, and it lay right out behind that door. The next 3 slides are really going to show you the European influences in this house. The first is this narrow staircase that leads upstairs. The picture on the far left leads to the back bedroom, which is downstairs. So there was a bedroom downstairs, which I now use as an office. and our housekeeping habits did not lend itself to photography, so you'll have to take my word for the fact that there is a room back there. Immediately off to the left is the original downstairs bathroom, which, much like the kitchen, has been through more remodels than we can count. But if we turn to the right, we proceed up this little half staircase, then turn left again and go up to the top landing. This is not a particularly adaptive American design, and I will tell you from personal experience that a queen-size box spring will not go up that staircase. He elected not to install an Amsterdam or Dutch beam in the upstairs of the house, so if it's going upstairs, it's got to make that corner or it's not going to go. When we reach the top of the stairs, here's another one of the built-in storage units in the house, of which there are several. There's one downstairs in the parlor, there's this one here, which is just a wonderful use of space. There are under the, each one of the eaves, there's storage there as well, which makes it great for retirees who have accumulated way too much stuff and are still trying to sort through it. At the top of the stairs, you turn right and you go into the guest room. These inverted gables is where this European influence once again really pops through. This is not even a 1920s, 1930s American design. This is very much a more European design with these inverted gables and this room. The wonderful story about that bedroom is that was Marilyn's room when she was growing up as a girl in the house. And when she was a senior in high school, there was this young swain that was a freshman at Pacific College, and they tell stories of her sitting in that bedroom window waiting for Harold Antrim to come walking up the grass path from Pacific College to come courting on Fulton Street. I will also mention, since he's here, there was another occupant of this bedroom who is here with us tonight. But Sam swears that when he occupied this bedroom, it was a long time after Marilyn moved out, so there you go. The master bedroom, again, the eave storage, beautiful room, innovative closet that was built over the stairway. Not great for hanging long gowns, but a very functional little closet up there. And this little alcove, right in the room, when I first looked at it, I thought that much like the buffet downstairs, that this would have been another attempt to maybe put some kind of a fireplace in the upstairs. No, actually, there's an electrical outlet right here, and it's been there since the day the house was built. Again, being creative, he created this little alcove for an electric space heater to be plugged into that space. And the shape of it and its position in the room, it radiates heat out into the room. So not only was he a great builder, but he was a really inventive designer as well. So what happened next, the living history of this house? There's a list of successive owners. It's sort of the Stonehouse begats. It started with 3 lots on Fulton that were all acquired by the Jones family, owned by the Martins, the Schmoes, and the LeVars. And then the Jones occupied this property from 1939 to 1954, moving into the house in the fall of 1942. Again, with the delay of building the brother's house next door, it took them 3 years to build the house and finally move into it. Then, when they left, John and Laura McPhee bought it. The house then went to Harvey and Dorothy Campbell. That's who bought it. It was sold by Harvey and Elsie Campbell, and I'll bet you somebody in this room knows the story of why Harvey and Dorothy bought it and Harvey and Elsie sold it. That's a story I don't know. It then went to Calvin and Margaret Seifert. Stephen and Michael O'Halloran bought it next, but Stephen quit-claimed his portion of the house to his brother Michael, who in turn quit-claimed 50% share to his wife Melissa. And finally, in April 1991, Bruce and Linda Gillespie bought the house. And they had the house for the longest tenure of any of the owners. not relinquishing it until 28 July 2011. Linda happens to be with us tonight. They were the longest residents there, and they added the addition on the back, which we very much enjoy, putting a lovely family room on the back of the property, and then upstairs, going out the north wall of the upstairs bedroom, added another entire beautiful walk-in closet, bathroom. So the house now has 2 full baths and some wonderful living space thanks to them. Finally, Friendsview Manor, doing business as Friendsview Retirement Community, acquired the house in the summer of 2011. So, by way of summation, this house is unique in that it's got these great historical ties to the Great War, to Quaker self-sacrifice, to Newberg schools where Harlan was employed for so many years, to George Fox University, and I will say that the builder of this house is arguably one of Newberg's more colorful antecedents. The guest list in this house, if you start exploring it, is amazing. There have been missionaries and friends and families. Anybody who has roots in this town pretty much knows somebody that lived here, ate here, slept here, dated somebody who lived here. This house has links to probably 50% of the adult population in Newberg. So what's the future hold for this little house? As I mentioned, I've got a deep self-interest because I live there and have since the summer of 2013. And it's currently slated for destruction. Friendsview Retirement Community is facing a burgeoning retirement population. And I'm right there on the bow wave of it. I'm one of the earlier baby boomers. And the tidal wave behind me is immense, and it's growing. And the need for retirement housing is not slacking off. And with urban growth boundary considerations, we have to optimize what we've got. So Friendsview has been on Sherman's March to the Sea. I'm sorry, that's a tough characterization. Friendsview has been on a property acquisition campaign for some time to try to acquire all the property from Hess Creek to Meridian and from Fulton Street to the railroad tracks, so that eventually they can provide an ever-increasing inventory of congregate housing in that block. University Village 1 was completed now a couple of years ago on the backside of that block by the railroad tracks, and the next piece of property that's slated for development is smack dab in the middle of where this house is located. The Friendsview Board has hinted that there could be some accommodation. One of the first ideas that was floated is maybe we can relocate it. And one would think that a house built out of stone and concrete can't be moved. Well, having watched them move other things in this town, I will tell you, no, it can be moved. It's a matter of engineering and time and will. But there are other possibilities for this house and some really creative land use designs. For example, Friendsview could use this as a guest house. They could turn it into the executive director's house, the executive mansion, if you will. But a couple of other things that we don't have right now. George Fox University doesn't have a museum. There's a very close relationship between Friendsview Retirement Community and George Fox. It's part of, in many ways, the same consortium. So that if, in fact, Fox wanted to open a conversation with Friendsview about having a museum there, it could be a wonderful adjunct for the entire community. And one of the designs that's being considered for the next expansion for Friendsview includes some public space. So maybe that could be creatively done. And the Newberg Area Historical Society could sure use an annex. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities. The one thing I will say is that if the Historical Society wants to get involved in this effort, it's not going to be through me. It's going to have to be through your organization, and it's going to have to be with the board of directors of Friendsview Retirement. I don't have a voice. I'm a resident. But there are many people in the community who have expressed an interest in this house, and if that interest was organized, I have a belief that some accommodation could be reached with Friendsview Retirement Community to preserve this house either in its current location or in somewhere very nearby. Now, one of the things that I've learned after hanging out in this town for over 25 years is that everybody knows everybody, everybody's got a piece of the puzzle. And I know there's a lot of things I don't know. So normally I would say at this point, are there any questions? But in this case, I'm going to say, are there any questions, comments, or corrections?
Can I ask a question about across the street where as part of the parking lot that was taken down?
Yes.
Have you heard anybody talking about moving it just across the street there?
I have not.
Because that's all empty now.
It is.
It's not paved and all that.
They took, well, there was that one little rickety house
Yeah.
that they took down when they expanded the parking lot,
Yeah.
about the time they built Duke Athletic. And then they've taken another house down. So that would be a conversation between Fox and Friendsview to see if that might be of interest to anybody. But that's a lovely idea, I like it. Vern, who grew up watching this house be built, by the way.
He lived at the corner of Fulton and St. and lost his boat around that. Maryland, I got in all kinds of trouble here. Laughing, so. I have a couple of comments about Art. He's the most gentle, honest man I ever met.
I have never heard anything to the contrary.
I
Quiet.
watched him run his bicycle, excuse me.
Yeah.
Watched him ride his bicycle down Fulton, balancing a long extension ladder over his shoulders. The story is told that he had a car, and Newberg at that time had penny parking meters down on First Street. He parked one of those, went into the store, came out, and the parking meter had expired. He put a penny in it and got in the car and drove off. He went cheap. City people got lost. I was in high school when he was custodian there. My grandfather had the job at Pacific College before he had it. So, in fact, I was born on a lot that touches this at one corner, I think, at 1100 Cherry Street.
Here we go. Yeah. Yeah.
Now that we take 15 Cherry right across the street from there.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thanks for inviting me. It's been fun putting this together. It's been fun talking about it. Sam?
You mentioned that Harlan took a couple of spills.
Yes.
The spill off the ladder at his home, he was pruning a cherry tree in his backyard. I think it was the fall or winter of 1952. I was a freshman at George Fox. Because he was comatose, they hauled him down to the local hospital, which at that time was located in what is now First Federal's parking lot. It was Dr. Bump's hospital. Two-story house. The operating room was on the second floor. If you wanted to have an operation, you had to be able to walk up the stairs. The first floor was divided into two wards. One side was women's, the other side was men. There were six, as I recall, 6 beds in each one on each side. Harlan was in the bed, and he was very strong. He was not in his right mind, and he kept getting out of bed, and the nurses could not keep him in bed. I volunteered because I grew up with Harold Landry in Idaho, so I knew Harold and Marilyn. And I volunteered to go down in the afternoons when I would normally be doing homework, or should be doing homework. And I sat with him, did homework, and kept him in bed and covered up. In my sophomore year, I ran out of money and was going to have to leave school at the end of the first semester. Harlan and Gertrude invited me to come and stay in their home at no cost, up in that room, because at that time, by then, Harold and Marilyn were married. And I lived for a full semester up in that little room that you showed. They were kind, no end. And at that time, I was courting my wife, and on occasion, Harlan would loan me his car. And I believe that that's probably where I proposed to my wife. I was in his car.
What a great story.
graceful, wonderful thing.
And with those inverted ceilings and you being not a short person,
Oh,
I'm
my
delighted,
God.
I'm delighted to see that there's no permanent damage from constantly hitting your corners.
You don't know me well enough.
Vern?
You implied that my friend that just spoke stayed in the room after Marilyn left. He also lived with my wife before we were married.
That's got to be the topic of a separate lecture, right?
That's his story.
So come back next week for Sam Farmer, Man About Town. Oh, anybody else? Ma'am?
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
I
my
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. I've admired that house since I was a kid when my parents and my siblings and me lived right next door to the left.
Oh, you did?
Back in the 1960s, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah,
thank
no,
you very much.
we fell in love with that place when we first started coming to Newberg. Never in a million years thought I'd end up living there. Yeah, it's been a real treat.
I bet.
Yeah, it's fun. Anybody else? Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you very much for coming. If you want to know anything else about the Historical Society, the work we're doing, chat with some of the board members,